But shouldn't spiritual men be accountable only to God? Now, this is a disease that I see very widespread even in Christian circles. The idea that I'm okay as long as I have prayer in my Bible is very, very widespread, even among those who once had a life in churches. So this is not a dead question if you're not in a cult or don't have family members who are in a cult. It's ironic that cult leaders who refuse to be accountable to any outside bodies or even internal checks and balances, although they sometimes have stacked boards of directors, more often than not exert extreme forms of control on their followers. For instance, the Boston Church of Christ, which developed from the Churches of Christ in America, and the Disciples of Christ, derivatives from the ministry of Alexander Campbell around 200 years ago. The Boston Church of Christ is a classic example of this tendency for extreme control over membership. Members making daily reports to disciplers who in turn must give account to those above them in the vertical checking system. This pyramid power structure is a characteristic of cultic groups. Contrast the power structure in ancient Israel. Now, this is something I wouldn't have been aware of when I was a Jehovah's Witness, but thought through on my way out. The power structure in ancient Israel, where the divine right of kings was held in check by two other divine institutions, the Levitical priesthood and the office of the prophet. The Western democratic institutions, though hundreds of years of trial and error, have learned the advantage of such checks and balances. The cults, however, will never conform to this Old Testament precedent. So that's something that I think we all need to think through. There has to be accountability, and there has to be checks and balances within the system if we're going to maintain a healthy kind of structure. Even local churches have to submit to this principle. And it is the Old Testament principle. There was a diversity in Israel, even though the institutions existed and they were very powerful, but there were institutions with some overlapping membership. For instance, Jeremiah and Ezekiel were both prophets and priests. But usually the prophets were outside the priesthood, and certainly they were outside the princedom, that is the aristocracy of ancient Israel. So this very healthy theocracy. So when we're talking theocracy with Jehovah's Witnesses, let's keep that in mind, that theocracy looked a lot different than the pyramid power structure to which they are used, and which they have been brainwashed into thinking is God's way of doing things. Next, why are cults successful in keeping their followers despite their failures? By a steady barrage of propagandistic indoctrination, cultic groups manage to persuade their adherents that they have nowhere to go should they leave. By blackening all outsiders and whiting out their own mistakes or adjustments, never sins, we've probably noticed that, they're never called sins, they're called changes or adjustments. They hang on to their paranoid followers by these means. As Elul shows, once the myth of the party, God's organization, is accepted, almost anything can be offered as truth, even manifest changes in direction and doctrine. If the group is extremely active, alive, as by the way the Boston Church is, this is even more true. So this self-image of being alive to God, this animated spirit that such groups tend to generate, is a mass, really. It's the public mass for their propagandistic success. The true believer must know he is right now, yet he is able to rationalize the most drastic alterations in the group's teachings. C.T. Russell explained his changes of doctrine by misrepresenting the meaning of a Bible verse to refer to present truth, which presumably contrasts with past truth. When truth is this malleable, does it deserve the name truth? Nevertheless, whatever the party holds to be truth is truth. Direct quote from Orwell again. How is it that so many destructive religious groups flourish today in comparison to the past? Why did the cults develop from about 1830 to today? The dominant myth of our time is the religion of progress. Ever since the Enlightenment of the 17th century, modern man has assumed that knowledge, science, and society will inevitably progress upward. It is the acceptance of this notion, unique to modernity, that has made it easy for non-believers and believers to disregard the heritage of the past. For Christians too have caught the spirit of the world, which says the new is always better than the old. The Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses are but two of the cults which have their peculiar take on this mistaken idea of progress. We might even call it the faith in progress, because that's something the new religions share with the secular world. Why should I care, and what can I do anyway? So even if you do not have loved ones who are captive to destructive religious groups, you should lament the loss of millions of dedicated, self-sacrificing people to cults. Imagine the immeasurable benefit to society at large if these captive millions, slaving to no ultimate benefit, even to themselves, for these counterfeit Christs, were freed to reach their own potential and freed to give their gifts to the church, to legitimate institutions. Stephen Hassan points out that it is the strong-minded idealists who are most often the prey of such groups. He concludes by expressing the hope that every high school and college would teach its students about mind control and destructive cults, which goal can only be realized if people are first taught the God-given right of every human being to think for him or herself. Ronald Enroth suggests that halfway houses are needed. That's an interesting idea. Support groups, in that cult members such as alcoholics, just like drug addicts and alcoholics, the ex-cult members need special rehabilitation related to their specific situations. And of course, those of us who've come out of these mind control groups are in a very good position to do this. So we need help. We need information first and insight. And as I did in the first segment, I want to promote Stephen Hassan's Combating Cult Mind Control, and also Lauren Dawson's work, Cults in Context and Comprehending Cults. Excellent resources when it comes to preparing us to do effective work in ministering to those who are coming out and are still hurting. If you want a PDF of this, Destructive Religious Groups, how to recognize them and how to help their adherents, just let us know.